Hello, and welcome to the Mind Report. I'm Jonathan Phillips from Yale University's Departments of Philosophy and Psychology, and today I'm going to be talking with Kiley Hamlin, who's an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. Hey, Kiley.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How's British Columbia?
It's very nice, sunny today.
Oh, it's not sunny here. Still in the snow season.
Yes.
So Kiley's done a lot of really interesting work on infants' early social preferences, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into all of the details, I thought it'd be fun to talk to you a little bit about how you got interested in doing this and why you started studying infants in the first place.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it seems as though if you want to study how the mind works, it would be great to be able to distinguish the things that are sort of products of or part of the adult mind, one that is both the result of lots of human-specific cognitive structures that we maybe are born with or that are sort of part of humans as a species, versus the culture and experiences that each individual sort of goes through as they develop. Right. So the idea would be to study a population in which you could certainly infants start experiencing things even in the womb, so you can never sort of remove experience entirely, but you can try to tease out what is really solely the cause of experience and what might be more based on sort of fundamental human nature or cognitive structures that all humans share.
Right, so it's really just kind of what you're saying is kind of a way to just get at sort of the core of human nature in a way that we don't have to worry about, did they learn that, or did their parents just happen to teach them that at this certain time or something like that?
Right, exactly, yeah. And there's a lot of different kinds of learning, and young infants are good at some kinds of learning, like observing the world and figuring out how things work, but they're not so good at other kinds of learning, like following explicit instructions and reasoning through hard problems, etc. So if infants can do some things, we can be sure that it's not due to that second kind of learning. Right,
nice. And it seems like there is a lot of evidence recently showing that infants get a lot of things like much earlier than perhaps we would have thought. So, for instance, like the number cognition that Karen Wynn has shown.
Yeah, exactly. So over the past probably 2 decades now, there's increasing evidence that young infants are sort of a lot smarter than we think. So they, they do things like keep track of objects over time. Even if they, just go out of sight for a while, they seem to be able to add up and subtract objects, even large numbers of objects.
Yeah.
And also, they seem to have a sort of fine-tuned or fairly fine-tuned understanding of other people, which is sort of more the kind of work that I've been interested in.
Right. So they understand numbers in some ways, and there's surprising evidence for their understanding of, say, like naive physics, or where the object should move around in space. And then And then sort of that work, if I'm right, then that work sort of branched off into also studying, well, do they have early social understanding as well? And that's sort of where you picked up.
Yeah, so lots of my sort of forefathers in the cognitive science of infancy.
Or mothers.
And for mothers, indeed. Studied very physical cognition, so how infants understand the physical world. And beginning more recently, folks have become increasingly interested in social cognition. So I like to think that people are the most important parts of life, and that, in addition to having cognitive systems that help us move around in space and avoid falling objects and counting up how many nuts we have, we should definitely have cognitive systems to help us get along with people, figure out what they mean when they act, and what their motives are, etc.
Right. I mean, especially for human infants, it'd be pretty hard to get along without reading people at least somewhat well.
Absolutely, yeah. So the social world is great. There's lots of folks that mean infants good, but there might be some folks who mean infants badly and might be potentially dangerous to interact with. You can this is obviously true for adults, but you can imagine it might even be true for infants.
Yeah.
Telling apart individuals based on their motivations, whether they're sort of generally somebody interested in helping you or harming you,
right.
Seems like a pretty important skill to develop early.
Right. Okay. So why don't we go and jump into the way that you've actually studied that exact thing?
Sure. So when I began graduate school, I was interested in sort of social cognition in general. Just how do we understand that when someone acts, it's different from when, say, a robot acts in a similar way.
Yeah.
So we have minds, and minds, our minds control to some extent our actions. And through reading other people's actions, you can kind of see what kind of mind somebody has, what they mean to do, or what their goal was.
Yeah.
And so generally, I together with Karen Wynn and Paul Bloom, who were my advisors, came to the realization that the thing we should care most about other people thinking is whether they're thinking us well or harm, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not so important to know what someone wants to do as it is to quickly identify, is it a good thing for me or a bad thing for me?
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to figure out whether an individual might mean you help or you harm would be to sort of observe how they treat others. I don't want to hang out with that guy because I saw him be a jerk to somebody last week is a really safe way of navigating the social world, because you basically stay safe and still be sort of getting information about people.
Right. So there are lots of cases where they're, say, like a bully might not harm you, even though he harms someone else, but it just seems like a bad bet to make, right? I mean, you should be sort of risk averse if, like, the thing that's on the line is say, like, your life or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, maybe if you see somebody harm someone else, it has nothing to do with you, and you have no risk of being hurt in the future. But I would think that if you think about all the folks who hit somebody, those folks are probably, as a group, more likely to say hit you. And so generally it would be a good...
I'm sure there's
it would be a good rule of thumb. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so basically, with my advisors, we started asking whether babies are sort of distinguishing friend from foe, specifically whether they're doing it by seeing how these individuals treat third parties. So the important thing was that infants had no sort of previous experience with any of these individuals. They just saw three actors interacting, and one guy was nice to the third actor, and the second guy was mean to the third actor, and then we tried to examine their social preferences. The way in which we showed what nice and mean is that typically the third character, we called him the protagonist in all of our dramatic events.
And these are puppet shows, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are puppet shows. There's a protagonist puppet who is the one who is always trying to do something and sort of doesn't ever succeed.
Right.
So in one case, he tries to get up the hill. In another case, he plays with a ball and sort of loses his ball and wants it back.
Yeah.
And in a third case, he tries to open a box and can't do so.
Okay.
And then there's always one character who comes and helps the guy with his goal. So pushes him up the hill or opens the box or gives him the ball.
Yeah, nice guy.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's the
nice
kind
guy.
Yeah. And then infants would see a paired sort of mean character who would either push the guy down the hill or close the box, sort of slam it shut, or steal the ball away.
Yeah.
And so each infant would only see sort of one kind of scenario. So they'd see somebody help and harm on the hill, or they'd see somebody help and harm with the box. But the main idea is the same. There's just a nice guy and a mean guy who help or harm this individual, in particular by helping or hindering his goal.
Good. So after they watched the puppet shows of these people doing, how did you actually test whether or not they had made some sort of social judgments about the nice guys or the mean guys?
Yeah, so it's actually sort of the very basic, most easiest dependent variable ever.
Yeah.
We simply just ask them to choose one. So each infant just gets one shot, sort of one chance to tell us who they like more by reaching for, actor A or reaching for actor B. The very youngest babies who are actually even too physically immature to reach out for an object, those babies, we actually sort of put the two puppets up next to each other in front of the baby's face and video such that we can go back and code sort of the number of seconds they looked over at this one versus the number of seconds they looked over at that one.
Good.
And so we basically just get a measure of who do you like more, which is your preferred character.
And so how can you tell just from, say, which one the baby looks at or which one they first reach for, just given like an open choice, that's the one that they sort of prefer?
Well, so a lot of studies in infancy have shown us that infants tend to reach for or look longer toward things they like, if you sort of give them the chance, which is, of course, what we do as adults, right? So if somebody says, do you want chocolate or do you want Brussels sprouts, and you pick chocolate, that's a good indication that that's your preferred thing. Right. So choice is sort of certainly linked to preference in adults, and there's even evidence that that's true for babies too. And probably anyone who's had experience with a baby recognizes that they reach for the thing that they want to play with.
Right. Yeah. That seems safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So then, how young are these infants that you're testing?
So we've tested this all throughout infancy, which to me is basically the first 2 years of life. But the youngest that we've tested these kinds of things in is 3-month-olds. Again, this would be the kind of baby who is very much still sort of a lump.
Yeah.
They're just starting to sort of smile at people and make eye contact well and things like that. So they're sort of at the very, very beginning of becoming a social being.
Yeah.
Some of them are still sort of in the newborn, not really social yet. They're kind of just on the cusp of becoming social beings at 3 months.
Yeah.
And those babies are not only socially fairly immature, they're physically extremely immature.
Yeah.
And so they're not holding their heads up well yet. They're not able to reach out for objects, but what they can do is look at one thing versus another, as long as they're both, present in their visual field.
Yeah.
And so what we've actually done is we've used the looking methodology sort of throughout the first year of life. So it turns out that when you don't let older babies who can reach for a toy, they end up just looking at it, sort of choosing to stare at it and maybe get annoyed with you that they can't.
Hopefully someone will notice and give them the toy, basically.
Yes, we eventually give them the toy. Yes, but the older babies look longer at the nice puppets, as do the 3-month-olds. They look longer at the nice puppets too.
Also, at 3 months old, they're already seeming to make some sort of social judgment based on that, whether or not this guy helped a third-party person they weren't sure of, like the participant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot that needs to be going on in their mind in order to do this.
Yeah.
So I'd love to point out what that is.
Yeah.
So basically, they have to see the character. They have to keep track of 3 characters, right? Who differ just in what color T-shirt they're wearing or perhaps what shape they are. And they have to identify one and also identify that this one has an unfulfilled goal. So like he needs help or he wants something or something like that. And then they have to keep track of 2 other characters, one of whom acts in a way that serves to block the goal.
Yeah.
So that's mean to adults. And one of them that acts in a way that serves to facilitate the goal.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is basically babies would have to first figure out what the goal was, then figure out what the actions of the other individuals meant regarding that goal. So was it helpful or not? And then based on all of that sort of cognitive work, deciding if they like one or the other. And, so just in terms of keeping, the idea of understanding other minds, like this takes a lot of understanding. They need, there's 3 different minds and lots of different actions. And what's neat about the 3-month-old studies is that it's pretty much unlikely that a 3-month-old has, been pushed down a hill.
We hope not.
Yeah, we hope not. Or, had their something stolen from them,
Right.
in the same way. Although, of course,
And so you can
parents
always take something from them.
might be, it's easy to take stuff from babies, we hear, but certainly they're not being pushed down hills. And so it's interesting that they would be able to potentially evaluate others who have goals that they've never had, and who experience behaviors that they've never seen nor experienced. So it suggests that there's something basic about it.
Yeah, it is really shocking. So, I mean, do you think if you see this already in 3 months old, it's like, do you think that you would find it even younger? Or, I mean, is there some point at which you won't find this thing, or do you just?
Yeah. So that's a kind of tricky thing to answer. One of the things is that there's a whole bunch of reasons why younger babies might fail. One would be that they are still sleeping 20 hours a day at this point in their life, and they're
hard to wake them up. Yeah,
it's hard. Yeah, their vision is fairly poor, so it would be difficult to get stimuli that were capable of that infants were physically capable in terms of vision-wise, tracking all of these movements over time. They don't track movement very well before 3 months, so we think we're studying basically the youngest babies we can study with this method. In terms of they can see well enough to follow what's going on, they can track motion, they can realize that, the individual who they just saw at the back of the stage is now the same individual as the one they're seeing in the front of the stage, and that kind of stuff. So it would be difficult to push the age at which we are studying this much younger for those reasons. Whether theoretically I think there's any reason why a 3-month-old would get this and a younger baby wouldn't, that's a question of experience. So is there something in the first 3 months that they're cueing into that's allowing them to learn this? And that's where I think it's less likely. There's sort of not a link between the kinds of things that very young infants are being sort of, quote, helped with, and the kinds of things that they're interpreting as positive and negative in our puppet shows.
So if you see if you see it this early, you might just think, there's just no way that they could have learned. I mean, they only had 3 months. There's not going to be enough there, and given the types of judgments they're making, to really get this off the ground. So it has to be sort of built in a way.
Yeah, so sometimes we talk about constrained learning. So the idea being that, there's not a sense in which nothing was there, and then all of a sudden, through sort of very slow building up processes, like, for instance, seeing someone in this particular situation being helped and harmed and stuff. It doesn't seem to be that that's what's going on. It might be that there's something happening in the first few months of life that's helping them figure out what individuals are like, so agents who have goals and this kind of stuff. So it might be that that's emerging, but it seems like basically as soon as they can figure out that someone has a goal, and what it is, they are already well able to decide that someone's helping that goal and someone isn't, and that the helper is better.
Yeah, nice. So it seems like really exciting that you found this early preference for nice guys over mean guys in really young infants. But do you think it's a preference for nice guys, where I just think, oh, that guy's nice, and therefore maybe he'll help me out, or is it sort of a dislike of mean guys in particular? So do I not want to?
Yes. Yeah, so those are sort of two distinct possibilities, right? What might be going on is that infants like nice guys and choose them because they're good, or it might be that they choose nice guys because they actually really dislike mean guys. Or maybe sort of both are going on. Certainly both are going on in adults and children. So what we've actually found is this sort of interesting, or what I think is an interesting developmental effect, which is that the very youngest babies, 3-month-olds, they prefer nice puppets to mean puppets, but it actually seems to be specifically related to disliking the mean puppets. So they choose, or look longer to in this case, because they're the young ones, the nice guy over the mean guy, and they avoid looking at the mean guy versus a neutral character who's sort of neither nice nor mean. But they don't yet look longer at the nice guy versus a neutral character.
I see.
So
at least at the very beginning, it seems to be it's a judgment of that guy that did something bad, not, oh, this other guy seems pretty nice, I'd like to be his pal or whatever.
Right. So this is consistent with what has been called the negativity bias and sort of human cognition in general.
Yeah.
That basically we think being bad is sort of much worse than equal amounts of being good. And we notice it, we remember people's bad behaviors longer, all of these kinds of things. So negative information seems especially salient in a lot of aspects of psychology.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know that one of the alternative possibilities that people have proposed for this sort of findings that you get are that there's some sort of association account that could explain it. So the thought there is that, it's not that babies are making sort of rich social judgments, where they really have to understand, say, like their intentions and their goals, and that they were facilitated or hindered or something. It's just that I see something that seems kind of bad, like this guy knocking into this other guy or something, and then I just sort of associate that sort of negative feeling with the guy that did it. So is there a way that we can rule out that sort of account?
Yeah, well, there's a few ways in which we can try. So importantly, what we've done is crafted quite a few of these different kinds of scenarios.
Yeah.
So the idea is that any particular low-level association, so say they don't like smacking, or they like opening boxes, or they don't like slamming on boxes or something like that.
Yeah.
Any particular one of those associations wouldn't apply across all of our studies. So basically, the thing that unites all the different methods that we've done is kind of only that there's helping and hindering involved, not any of the physical stuff.
Right.
In addition, what we've done is actually tried to basically say, is this specifically a social judgment that infants are making? Mm-hmm. So what if non-social creatures, say a ball instead of a character with eyes, or say something that's like a long stick with a sort of claw thing at the end, does that, if that thing shakes around on a box and a puppet comes and opens the box with it, does that make them like that puppet? And what we found across the board is that doesn't inspire infants to make these kinds of judgments. So they don't like things they don't like characters that open boxes versus those that slam on boxes, unless somebody has the goal to open the box in the first place. So it doesn't seem to be that the low level stuff is having an effect.
Right. That's good. Yeah. So it really seems like it's something about judging other agents in particular.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, in a recent study, we've found that it's not just judging other agents, but it's actually seemingly really important that they can tell that an agent has a specific goal. Mm-hmm. So basically, when we show infants a show in which the agent's goal is less clear, so we start sort of removing cues that we know help us figure out that somebody has a goal. Like, are they looking that way? Do they seem to be like sort of trying really hard to get it? When we remove cues like that are really just physical things, infants stop distinguishing the characters. So even those who push guys up hills who happen to travel along the hill just didn't look very goal directed. They don't like those guys either.
Oh, so you really have to do a lot of work to make them see this agent or this guy in particular has some sort of goal, and it's only then that these sort of social judgments come online.
Exactly, yeah. So they don't just seem to be making judgments sort of willy-nilly about every puppet show they see.
Right.
There's lots of puppet shows we've shown them that they don't distinguish the puppets at all. And in fact, it's only the ones in which there's really a nice guy and really a mean guy that they do.
Well, one interesting thing, it seems like that would suggest that in cases, so the typical, when I think of a typical harm that someone's done to somebody, I think, some guy just ran over and hit some other guy in the face, or he did something like some sort of physical body contact, but there aren't intentions involved typically in those sorts of things. It's not like I have a standing intention not to get hit in the face or something like that.
Yes.
So would you not see it in cases of, say, battery in infants?
Yeah, so I've been wrestling around with that very question for years, actually, because I think it would be very interesting, sort of strong hypothesis, if we could find that if there isn't a goal present, infants sort of aren't maybe they aren't capable as early. Certainly we know that hitting becomes negative, fairly early in development. That's not the question. But if we could find some sort of dissociation between when infants get that pushing someone away from their goal is bad versus when they get that pushing someone, period, is bad, that might be really interesting and tell us something about what's causing these judgments to begin.
Yeah, that's nice. But as of now, there's not evidence that they actually do get this sort of effect when it's just sort of battery or something right now.
There isn't, no, and that's telling in itself,
right?
That we haven't found that.
Yeah. So you started with this stuff on, say, just hindering or helping someone achieve a goal, and then I think you've done a lot of work past then, and a lot of it seems to be in showing sort of like the complexity of the types of judgment that infants are making. So I wonder if you could sort of talk about the at least some directions of the extensions you've gone with.
Sure. So the question really is, does the mind of the infant look something like the mind of the adult? In that, does it make the same kinds of social and moral judgments?
Yeah.
So we've been pursuing a bunch of different questions, basically saying, well, adults do it like this, are infants doing it like that too? So one of the things that we've done is we know that adults don't always think niceness is the best policy.
Yeah.
There's sort of several big cases in which that's the case. A very classic one is, of course, punishment. If someone was bad before, we don't think, we should go rewarding that individual, even though rewarding is kind of nice. We, in fact, think that individual deserves punishment.
Yeah.
And in my lab, we found that as young as 5 months, infants think so too. So if they are seeing someone who has a goal, that is unfulfilled, sort of regular old unfulfilled goal situation like we've always shown them.
Yeah.
But before that, they found out that individual harmed somebody else. So instead of being totally unknown, they actually have information that this guy with the goal was bad himself.
Yeah.
In that case, infants are given the choice, as usual, between a helper and a harmer. But in this case, the helper and the harmer are helping and harming this bad guy.
Right. Nice.
In that case, as young as 5 months, infants prefer the bad guy. The harmer of the bad guy.
Right.
So they seem to like the one who, say, punishes the individual who was bad before.
Yeah. You made it sound so nice that like somehow it's like the infants have this sense of justice at 5 months of age, but I mean at the same time they're preferring someone that that punishes somebody.
Yes, that's right. So there's some evidence that we have that there's a dark side to this social judgment stuff that infants do. So we can sort of talk about them liking punishers in terms of this, how lovely that they like justice.
Yeah.
But we can also, and have also, demonstrated that they prefer those who harm lots of individuals, not just ones who have been bad themselves, so who deserve punishment, but actually even those who just differ from them in opinion about what food's better.
Right. So I wanted to talk about that a little later too. Yeah.
Yeah. So if infants see a puppet who has previously declared that he does not like the same food that the infant has been shown to like, then infants also like puppets who harm that guy. So it seems more like a mechanism like any enemy of my enemy is my friend is going on here. And certainly I wouldn't argue that that's not a lot of what's going on with adult punishment intuitions. And we know, we wouldn't have the phrase "the enemy of my enemy is my friend" unless
somehow that registers
unless
with
we understood it. Yeah. So, so infants are doing that too.
Yeah. Wait. So just to get back to like the complexity point, in the case that you're talking about, where they prefer someone that hurts someone who's been mean. I mean, the number of agents that they have to keep track of in those scenarios is just it's like 5.
It's 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 5. So we actually have some evidence that this is not an easy cognitive problem. So with our,
I can't keep track of 5 people.
Right, exactly. Parents in the lab are always thinking, I have no idea what that guy did before. Like, you know. Basically, in the study, they see one nice action and one mean action toward, all involving unknown characters.
Yeah.
And then some babies will see the guy who was nice from that first set go into the next set. So basically they have to remember, oh yeah, that's the guy who was nice before. Mm-hmm. Other babies see the guy who was mean in the first set go into the next set. They have to remember, oh yeah, that guy was mean before. And then they have to evaluate 2 new characters based on their different, so it's nice and mean in a different way, nice and mean behavior toward the target, who again, they still need to remember what he did before. So it's fairly complex.
Yeah.
And yet they do it. And in addition, it doesn't seem to be some kind of sort of low level or, less interesting or smart, less smart, what we might call a valence matching mechanism.
Yeah.
So you might imagine that what's going on is just that they're like, oh, negative and negative. Oh, that's positive.
They're multiplying negative ones or something.
Right. Like maybe they remember their math class.
Yeah. It's really possible.
Their first month of
babies
life.
are really smart. I mean, if we found out one thing, so maybe they already understand early one.
Right. So basically what we reasoned is that just like adults like those who punish bad guys, but don't like those who punish victims, we think that only those who do bad behavior deserve punishment, not those who have happened to receive it, right? So what we did was basically make that same, we asked infants that same question. So instead of choosing between those who were helping and harming a bad guy, in which we know they like the harmer, they were choosing between those who were helping and harming a victim of somebody else's bad behavior.
Right. Yeah.
And so in that case, they went back to liking the helper. So they know that, if you've been harmed, you shouldn't get harmed again.
Right. So if it's just the valence matching, you think, oh, this guy got harmed, that's a -1, and then this guy harmed him, that's a -1, then they should also prefer someone like a victim that got harmed, but they don't. So it really suggests they're making sort of complex social judgments or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really nice. So one question that I've always wondered is, I mean, you're showing this, your effects are really large. I mean, but there are always some babies who prefer the guy that was mean, who prefers someone. And so, I mean, are you finding the early roots of psychopathy or immorality? I mean, what do you think is going on with those infants?
Well, so the short answer is we don't know. There's a few responses that I'd like to give. We actually, in some studies, we don't find any babies liking the mean puppet. So in more than one study, we found 100% of babies do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so people at home who sort of don't know how infant research works, this is sort of unfathomable. It's basically like, it's sort of like studying infants is like herding cats, and yet every baby responds in the same way, or 90% of babies respond in the same way, or 2 babies in this whole study didn't do the liking of the nice guy or whatever.
Right.
And so the extremely low amount of noise, differences in our data across all our subjects that we get is sort of suggests that this is very, very basic.
Yeah.
So that could mean 2 things. One is that it was, there's nothing that will make herding cats like trivially easy, right?
Yeah.
And so the babies who aren't doing it are just those babies that are just kind of like left over when you reduce the noise from regular old baby studies.
So they're the ones that kind of fell asleep in the middle of the study, or started crying, or got confused, or
Right. So, we don't know exactly why a baby picks a puppet when they do, right?
Yeah.
Like one baby in the sample might just love the color pink so much that they picked the pink shirted puppet, and they would do it whether or not he was nice, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's not happening very much indicates it's a really strong effect. Another possibility is something that I'm sort of reluctant to talk about, in that we really have no evidence that this is the case.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping to start looking at some of our infants' responses over time. So we have a lot of families who are willing to come in for a lot of our studies, mostly because their kids like it. It's pretty...
Well, you get nice puppet shows.
Come in and watch a show.
Someone gets to push somebody down.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, they get T-shirts and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So parents are willing to come in many, many times, which is so wonderful for our research.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we could easily look for is whether, if a baby chose the nice guy in one study, are they more likely to choose the nice guy in another study?
Right.
And, if they chose the mean guy, are they more likely to choose the mean guy in another study? The problem with this is that almost no babies choose, the mean puppets or the sort of puppets that aren't with hypothesis or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would take a long time to find a big enough sample of babies who ever chose the mean guy, much less ones who chose the mean guy all the time.
Right.
And so what I'm hoping to do in the future is to actually try to get more subtle measures.
Mm-hmm.
What's nice about our stuff is that, it's A versus B. They either choose the nice one or they choose the mean one. But this basically means we have no variation to look for potential differences between kids.
Yeah.
It's basically like trying to study the variation in, males and females.
Right.
So what I'm hoping to do is to develop some more what we would think of as continuous variables to look over time, and to say, like, okay, well, all infants look longer at the nice one than the mean one, but are there infants who look less longer at the nice one than the mean one? And whether we can see what might be going on there.
Right, then you can do some sort of longitudinal study, and you can track, like, oh, this infant only looked for 7 seconds at the nice one, and then in second grade, he started beating up his, best friend, Joe.
Yes, it would be dangerous to make conclusions like that from very little data, which is the only thing we could possibly say we have right now.
Yeah.
But, it's not inconceivable to think of in the future to get sort of teacher reports, parental reports about just sort of how, nice their own child is. And to try to look at that in a serious way. Yeah.
But, I think you can look at it from the other side as well. And, so it seems like if we get this, and almost all infants do get this idea of, what is the right thing to do, or the pro-social thing to do, or the anti-social thing to do from just really, really early on, then, it's sort of striking how many wrong things that we all do. You might think that given that, we're just built to be these, creatures that know what's helpful and what's harmful to other people from, the earliest time, why is it that we, as adults, just often violate it?
Yeah, so we are an extraordinarily, violent bunch
surprisingly violent bunch.
Yes, that is true.
That's why we were the ones that survived.
Right. But if you think about humans in relationship to other animals, humans are not only extraordinarily violent, vindictive, etc.
Yeah.
They are also extraordinarily nice to each other. Yeah. So they give lots of their money, well, maybe not lots, but some of their money to charity. They go out of their way to help out strangers that they see in need. They, take care of individuals that really they're not going to get any benefit from this themselves personally. They just do it. And so the idea is, humans are pretty bad, but they're also pretty good. And one, it's just a puzzle, right? So
Yeah,
how are we
yeah.
both, how are we both so bad and so good?
Yeah.
And what sort of evolutionary biologists have tried to answer this puzzle with is the idea that it's beneficial for all of us if we are nice to each other, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you and I are going to do better if we team up and, like, build a house together than if we each try to build our own house,
Yeah.
right? But if I sit around while you build both of us a house, then I'm like the ultimate winner who didn't have to do anything and still gets a sweet house.
Right.
And so the idea would be that it's great if we're nice to each other, because being nice actually is beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
But those who are, seeming like they're participating in the nice cooperative stuff and actually failing to do their part are very bad. So those are the folks who would ruin the cooperative system. So the idea would be, if we're nice, we also have to be really, really judgmental. So we have to be able to tell who are the cooperators, who are the good guys, who should I hang out with and team up with and take costs to myself so we can all do better.
Right.
And who are, in particular, who are the ones who I should not be cooperating with, who I should avoid. They mean me harm. They're not going to cooperate with me.
Right.
So the idea would be, we're nice and we're mean.
And it pays to be both at the right to the right people.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It pays to be both to the right people, and it pays to be really, really judgy. So to quickly care what others are doing, even if it seems like it has nothing to do with you, you're getting information about, who you want to ally with and have on your team and who you don't.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, and this relates back to the stuff that you were talking about earlier with infants and even just people's preferences. So it doesn't, I mean, in the way we were talking about it, you might think, well, it really pays to be mean to mean people or nice to nice people or something like that. But it seems like some of the work you've done also suggests that infants think that it pays to be people that don't like the same food as they do. So maybe yeah. So maybe the first thing to do is actually just to quickly go through those studies, just so that we make sure everybody's on the same page.
Sure. So this study is just coming out sort of as we speak, and basically what we're reporting is that infants came into the lab and they themselves chose between two foods, graham crackers and green beans. You might think every baby chose graham crackers, but that's not actually the case.
There are babies that like green beans.
Yeah, in fact, almost half of babies at 9 months like green beans over graham crackers, but that preference diminishes over time. So by the time they're in their second year of life, it's more like 80% of babies liking graham crackers. But there are still some green bean lovers in the bunch, so that's
good. Yeah,
that's good.
Those are the healthy babies.
So yes, healthy babies. So it doesn't actually matter what the infants chose. It didn't. Our design was designed to incorporate that, and it didn't affect any of the results. So those who liked graham crackers were exactly the same in terms of their preferences for puppets at the end as those who like green beans. But the idea was that then we would show infants that one puppet shared their own food preference. So if they liked graham crackers, they would see a puppet who tried graham crackers and said, yum, 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 and a puppet who... and when they tried green beans, they said, bleh, I don't like that. And another puppet would show the opposite preference of the infant. So if this infant chose graham crackers, this puppet would go up to green beans and say, yum, 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 and go up to graham crackers and say, bleh, I don't like that.
Right.
So basically there was one puppet who agreed with the infant and one puppet who didn't, or one puppet with a similar preference to the infants and one with the opposite preference. And so the idea was... okay, so first of all, the one question is like, do babies care at all if somebody likes the food they like or not?
Yep.
And previous studies had showed that after they see somebody declare that they like the same food as an infant, that they would then choose that puppet in a similar way to like
preferential reaching.
One.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They would reach out and grab the puppet who liked the same food they liked.
Yeah.
So that could be for a variety of reasons. And what we did in this study is we wanted to get at whether they disliked the puppet who didn't share their food preference so much that they might like those who harm that puppet. So the idea was just like when we like those who punish bad guys, we basically showed infants the same kind of idea puppet show in which they chose between a helper and a harmer, but the guy who was helped and harmed was either the puppet who shared the infant's preference, who we think infants like, or it was the puppet who showed the opposite preference, who we think infants don't like.
Right.
And the results were fairly astonishing to me at the time, anyway, although I guess we designed the study, so in some ways we thought it was possible that it would work, but, it's this sort of, this won't ever work, but let's try.
Right.
And what we found is that 9-month-olds and 14-month-olds always preferred the character who harmed the puppet who didn't share their food preference. So, just like they preferred punishers of bad guys, they preferred punishers of those who differ from them. Like, just having a different opinion is enough for babies to want you to get beat up.
So it's not even the babies that I mean, you might think earlier we were worrying about the babies that didn't get these sort of judgments that early. Now we should just be worried mainly about the babies that do get this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we can't really tell a story like we can with the punishment stuff where like, oh, that's great. Like, they understand justice. The story that we would have to tell here is like, oh, that's great. They totally show these like biases that we know are really kind of dangerous in adults and, that would lead them to like beat up a Red Sox fan or a Yankees fan or whatever.
Right, exactly.
And so it's not particularly a positive message about infant social judgments that we have at the end of this study. Basically, I like those who are good unless you're not on my team, and then I like those who are bad to you.
Right.
What we found was we wanted to know whether what was driving this effect was liking those who harm those who are different, or just disliking those who help those who are different. Like, this kind of, well, I'm fine with it if he's over there, but just don't go and help him. And so what we found is that 9-month-olds were pretty confused by this. As soon as we introduced any neutral characters, they were pretty much confused. They were at chance in their choices. Even though they weren't at chance in their original choices. So they were definitely sure that they liked mean guys over nice guys to dissimilar others. But when we introduced neutral, maybe their memory load just got too much and they seemed to just fail across the board. But 14-month-olds didn't. They showed fairly consistent patterns that are sort of the strongest you might imagine. So basically they like those who harm different others over neutral guys.
Yeah.
So they think harming is better than neutral. Right. And they avoid those who help different others.
So you get it sort of both ways by 14 months.
Exactly, yeah. They think helping dissimilar others is worse than neutral. Oh. So it's kind of the, quite the dark side, it seems, of social judgments is that they're basically, showing these alliance building kind of preferences as opposed to just liking niceness across the board.
Yes, I mean, how much this work in some ways it seems very, very similar to the other stuff that you were talking about with helpers and hinderers. I mean, do you see these two things as sort of coming out of the same sort of underlying system, or are these just two parts of different systems which happen to look alike in certain ways?
Yeah, so my hypothesis about where any of this comes from is that it's all about distinguishing friends from foes, right? So if we hypothesize about why such a system would be in place, basically, to me, the best answer is it helps people get along in groups over time. And so part of cooperating with individuals is choosing to cooperate, so sort of being nice and wanting to cooperate, distinguishing those who sort of maybe are less cooperative than others, maybe within our own groups. But also part of that is deciding that there's maybe some individuals who are not even on my team. They're sort of in another group, or they're generally just by virtue of who they're associated with, maybe they're more likely to harm us too, right?
Right.
And so if basically we're always doing who's going to harm me, well, it's probably those who harm others or those who are sort of on a different team than we are.
Yeah.
And so infants seem to be making both of those judgments. Of course, the latter is not one that in sort of modern globalized cultures we ascribe to as being appropriate.
Right.
But certainly there were times in history in which it was dangerous to come up against someone you didn't know or who differed from you in some important way, and so it would actually be best to maybe avoid them or to even identify what other individuals think about them, potentially by viewing how they treat them.
Right. So it's really interesting, and so if that's right, that the underlying mechanism maybe for both these things is some sort of alliance building or deciding sort of who's with me and who's against me, or who's going to help me and who's not going to help me. I mean, to what extent do you think that these judgments are even in the earlier stuff where we're looking at sort of, the nice guy and the mean guy, were sort of even moral or normative judgments at all? Or is that just totally the wrong way to think about it at this point? Yeah,
so, I mean, I think there's two parts of moral. One is normative and one isn't, right? So you can define moral as the thing that we do when we think hard and decide that something's the right thing to do. Or you can define it as like anything kind of in the realm of stuff humans tend to make moral judgments about.
So one might say is like truly normative in some sense, and the other one is just sort of like, well, it's like the type of thing that we might call moral or something. But we put it in scare quotes or something.
Exactly. So when I think about it, I like to think like morality with a capital M. Yeah. Like, the stuff that philosophers have penned tomes about, or morality with a little m, which is like, I don't like it when I see somebody hit somebody else. Like, I don't think about philosophers when they make that judgment. I just decide that's wrong. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And so certainly I don't think babies are doing morality with a capital M. But
they haven't yet had the delight of reading Kant.
Yes, exactly. And it will be a delight when they do reach that point. But what I think they might have is morality with a little m. So there's other sort of signatures of what we think of as like real morality, as in real morality with a little m, that we found that infants do. So, for instance, we know that adults focus on mental states when they make judgments of somebody's, if they deserve reward or punishment. Or if they are sort of a good actor or a bad actor, their action was good or bad. And we found in several different scenarios that infants do that too. So one case is a puppet who looks at one toy and looks at another toy and then ends up choosing the one toy. So say there's a duck and a flower, and this puppet always goes for the duck.
Right.
Okay? And then he loses access to both of the possible toys.
Okay.
So he used to have access to both. Now he has access to none.
Yep.
And the helpers and the hinderers in this case, they can do something that will allow the puppet to get to his desired object.
Okay.
Or they can do something that will allow the puppet to get to an object, just not the one he wanted.
Right. Yep.
And so the idea here is that for us, for adults, what would matter in terms of if we were going to say that one puppet, is better than the other puppet, who both give access to a toy, but one is the desired toy and one isn't the desired toy.
Yeah.
Is the knowledge of the puppets who give access to toys about the preference of the character. So if they know that the character liked the duck and didn't like the flower, then it's kind of...
Then you're like kind of like a dick if you just give him the...
exactly.
The
it
one
would be
he
a
didn't
mean
like.
thing to do if you knew.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know, there's no sense in which we would hold somebody morally responsible for not, having the ability to know something that they
He's just ignorant.
Yeah. So basically what we did is we set up those two situations. So in one case, the puppets know the preference of the character when one gives access to the toy he liked and the other gives access to the toy he didn't like. In the other case, the puppets don't know the preference of the character because they just weren't there to see it. So exactly the same thing happens. The character gets access to the toy he likes or he doesn't like, but in a case in which the access givers are sort of ignorant to the preference. And what we find is exactly what you might think that we do as adults, which is that in the case in which the characters knew the preference, infants strongly preferred the guy who, did the nicer thing, gave access to the right toy. And in the case in which the puppets didn't know the preference, they had absolutely no, as a group, they didn't choose one character over the other. They were exactly 50-50. And so basically it seems like they understand that to be blamed or praised for something you do that ends up helping somebody or harming somebody, you have to be knowledgeably doing it. You have to have the intention to do it. So that's kind of a big issue in morality is the sort of, what did he mean to do? Was it an accident?
Yeah, you really need to know how much he knew and what were his options and things like that.
And so we're finding evidence of that. That's with 10-month-old babies.
Wow.
So maybe not as young as 3 months, but in the first year of life.
So it seems like what's really striking about this research you're doing and the way that you think about it is that a lot of adult morality is just sort of settled by 6-10 months of age or something like that. And that's the striking thing about that. I think the most perhaps controversial thing about that is that a lot of the way that people tend to think about morality is that culture matters or our environment matters or our upbringing matters. In some sense, you might think that if you're right, parents should stop even trying to do anything with teaching their kids to be good or bad or nice or mean. They just, give it up. They knew it at 6 months. So you don't have to reteach it to them.
Well, that's true in some ways and not in others. And I think maybe the study showing that infants like those who harm individuals who don't like the same food they like would be a great piece of evidence that parents are right to be concerned about their infants' moral development. So there are things that infants might be doing that we would all agree, if an adult made that judgment, it might count as part of the moral realm, right? So morality with a little m. There are also things that infants are doing that go, smack in the face of morality with a big M, of the sort of normative...
The things that we think are actually right to do or something like that.
Exactly, So infants' social preferences are sort of, I think, from my biased opinion, are shockingly similar to... those that adults make, and those that adults make that they call moral while they're making them. But in some ways, they're exactly the opposite. And so, moral development is not to be the concern with it is not to be should not be eliminated. But what I think this does tell us is that the idea that we need to help kids distinguish, good kinds of behaviors from bad kinds of behaviors. Just the idea that something could be good or bad is not the case. So infants seem surprisingly judgmental, perhaps in ways in which we don't want them to be, but judgmental nonetheless. So they can tell that there's good stuff going on out there and bad stuff going on and good guys and bad guys. We just need to help maybe them figure out which are the real good guys and which are the real bad guys.
Great. That seems interesting. So let that be a lesson to all the parents that are watching. Please don't think I'm advocating the end of moral development. So Kiley, it's been really, really good talking to you. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.